Chapter 1. The Curse Begins. In the ancient city of Mycenae, a kingdom of marble palaces and golden halls, two brothers were born into a lineage marked by greatness and doom. Atreus, the elder, was proud and ambitious, destined to inherit the throne of Mycenae. Thyestes, his younger brother, was clever, charming, and fearless. Yet beneath his charm lay a hunger for power that could not be restrained. From the very beginning, the bond between them was a fragile one, strained by rivalry. At first, it seemed harmless, mere competitions over hunting, feasts, or royal favor. But slowly, jealousy crept in, as it often does in the hearts of those who share blood, but not temperance. The turning point came in the form of a woman, Atreus's wife, radiant and beautiful, a prize in a palace where alliances were as fragile as the finest wine glass. Thyestes, cunning and daring, seduced her, not merely for lust, but as a calculated act of betrayal. This was no simple affair. It was an open wound to Atreus's pride, a public humiliation in the very halls where power was measured by honor. When Atreus discovered the betrayal, his fury was immediate and overwhelming. His hands shook with rage. He tore through the palace corridors, his footsteps echoing like thunder. He imagined the whispers of servants, the judgment of courtiers, the scorn of the city itself. In Greek culture, honor was everything, and Thyestes had stolen it with a smile and a secret glance. But Atreus was no impulsive man. His mind, sharp and calculating, began to weave a plan. This was not a crime of passion. It would be deliberate, precise, and merciless. Every day he watched Thyestes with a gaze that hid a storm within. Every conversation, every smile, every gesture was noted, stored, and filed in the ledger of his revenge. Thyestes, in his arrogance, remained blissfully unaware. He moved through the palace corridors, believing he had outsmarted his brother, that he had claimed his triumph without consequence. He laughed freely, feasted openly, and continued to charm all who would listen. Little did he know, the seeds of vengeance had already been planted, and they would grow into something far darker than he could imagine. In the heart of the palace, the shadows seemed to lengthen, as if even the stones themselves recognized the dark designs at play. Atreus plotted not only for his own satisfaction, but for a justice so absolute that it would echo through the ages. He envisioned a punishment so horrific that the gods themselves would shudder at its execution. And so the first chapter of the tragedy was set. A brother's betrayal, a husband's humiliation, a mind consumed with vengeance. In this fragile moment, before the horrors of the infamous feast began, the curse of the house of Atreus took its first breath. A curse that would not die and that would claim not just hearts, but flesh in the days to come. This was the beginning of the nightmare. The world of Mycenae, golden and bright by day, was already darkened by the shadow of betrayal, and the stage was ready for a story that would horrify generations. Chapter 2. The Deception. After the initial betrayal and the simmering rage it ignited, Atreus did something that would set the stage for one of the most infamous acts in Greek mythology. He sent a message to his brother, Thyestes, inviting him back to Mycenae under the guise of reconciliation. The letter was smooth and diplomatic, filled with words of forgiveness, peace, and brotherly love. But beneath the words lay a trap, carefully constructed by a mind consumed with vengeance. Thyestes, proud and arrogant, read the message and allowed himself a moment of triumph. He believed he had outwitted Atreus, that he had turned the tables and secured his place in the palace once more. He imagined the envy and awe of the courtiers, the humiliation of his elder brother, and he could not resist the opportunity to return. He gathered his belongings, mounted his finest horses, and rode back to the city that had once been his home, unaware that it would become the theater of a nightmare. Meanwhile, Atreus set his plan in motion. Servants were instructed to prepare the palace for a feast of unprecedented opulence, with golden plates, fine wines, and dishes that promised luxury beyond imagination. But the heart of this banquet was not in its richness or abundance. It was something far darker, an instrument of revenge that would strike not just Thyestes' pride, but his very soul. Atreus had taken Thyestes' son, the boy he loved most in the world. The child, innocent and unaware, had been taken from his father's arms. Atreus' plan was so horrifying that it seemed almost impossible to believe. He would kill the boy and serve him as the main course at the feast, a cruel revelation that would shatter Thyestes' mind and heart. As the day of the banquet approached, the palace was filled with a strange, tense energy. Servants moved silently, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. The kitchen buzzed with preparation, yet an eerie quiet hung in the halls. Atreus walked among his people, speaking words of warmth and welcome to Thyestes, yet in his eyes burned the cold fire of calculation. He feigned generosity, masking the storm he had prepared, all while the city remained oblivious to the horror about to unfold. When Thyestes arrived, he was greeted with smiles, embraces, and the outward appearance of reconciliation. He was seated at the head of the table, proud and unsuspecting, as dishes were brought before him, rich in aroma and inviting in appearance. He laughed, made small talk, and congratulated himself on his cunning. He believed he had outsmarted his brother and that peace had been restored. All the while, Atreus watched with a cruel satisfaction. Every gesture of Thyestes, every laugh, every sip of wine fed the anticipation in Atreus's mind. This was not merely revenge. It was a lesson carved in fire and blood, a demonstration of the consequences of betrayal. The trap was perfectly set, and Thyestes, blind to the danger, walked willingly into its heart. As the feast began, Thyestes marveled at the abundance and generosity displayed before him. He did not suspect that the most sacred bond in his life, his love for his child, was about to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. Atreus maintained the facade of brotherly care, smiling as he poured wine and spoke of peace, while the dark truth simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the moment of revelation. The palace, golden and grand, now became a stage of deception. The laughter of Thyestes, the clinking of cups, and the polite conversation masked a horror so profound that it would echo through the centuries. The stage was set, the actors oblivious, and the audience, the gods themselves, watched silently as the trap tightened. And so the shadow of vengeance fell over Mycenae. Thyestes, confident and proud, unknowingly embraced the beginning of a nightmare. Atreus, cold and calculating, prepared the final act. The moment of horror was coming, and when it arrived, nothing in the world would ever be the same for Thyestes, nor for the generations of his bloodline yet to come. Chapter 3. The Banquet. The day of the feast arrived, and the palace of Mycenae was ablaze with light, laughter, and the scent of sumptuous food. Yet beneath the golden chandeliers and polished tables, a darkness lingered, a secret so vile that even the walls seemed to tremble with anticipation. Thyestes, unaware of the true nature of the banquet, entered the hall with pride and confidence. He felt triumphant, believing that he had returned to claim his victory over Atreus, that the betrayal had been forgotten and the rivalry settled. Servants moved silently around the table, placing golden plates and pouring crimson wine. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats, baked breads, and delicate herbs. Every dish was crafted with care, every detail meticulously planned, yet none of it held the luxury that Atreus intended to display. It was a stage, a carefully orchestrated performance of horror. Thyestes sat at the head of the table, a glass of wine in hand, his face illuminated by the flickering torchlight. He laughed, sharing a few words with his servants and courtiers, completely unaware that the most sacred bond of his life, his love for his son, was about to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. Atreus, seated opposite him, maintained a calm and courteous smile, pouring wine into Thyestes' cup, speaking of peace, brotherhood, and forgiveness. Every word was carefully chosen, every gesture measured, masking the storm that brewed beneath. His eyes, however, betrayed a different truth. A fire of rage, patience, and cold calculation waiting to consume the unsuspecting Thyestes. As the first dishes were served, Thyestes marveled at the generosity, the abundance, and the beauty of the presentation. He praised the cooks, complimented the servants, and allowed himself a sense of relief. He believed the past was behind them, that the feud was settled, that the elder brother had finally acknowledged his own weakness and folly. Little did he know, the centerpiece of the banquet, the dish that would mark the culmination of Atreus' revenge, was already before him. Atreus had killed Thyestes' son and prepared him as the main course. The boy, innocent and unaware, had become an instrument of horror, the very embodiment of a father's betrayal and grief. Thyestes took the first bite. He smiled, savoring the taste, commenting on the unusual richness and flavor. He laughed, oblivious as the meat disappeared from his plate. Every moment, every morsel carried the weight of unspeakable tragedy, and yet he remained blind to the reality, unable to see the dark truth hidden in plain sight. Atreus spoke softly, his words soothing and cordial, while the shadow of his vengeance hovered over every gesture. He watched, calculating the exact moment when the horror would be revealed, measuring Thyestes' reactions, allowing anticipation to build until the final unveiling. The hall was alive with the sounds of the feast, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the occasional laugh. Yet, beneath the surface, a terrible tension simmered, a silent knowledge that the gods themselves seemed to withhold judgment, leaving mortals to confront the consequences of their actions. As the meal progressed, Thyestes' comfort and confidence grew. He did not notice the subtle glances, the whispers behind hands, the fleeting shadow that crossed the walls. All around him, the palace was alive with deception, and yet the deception was perfect. The stage was set, the audience, though silent, watched, and the tragedy was approaching its apex. And then Atreus spoke, his voice calm and deliberate. He revealed the truth. The child Thyestes had cherished, the son he had loved above all else, lay slain and served upon his plate. The revelation struck like lightning. Thyestes froze, his mind unable to comprehend the horror. The laughter ceased, the murmurs died, and the warm light of the palace became cold and unbearable. Shock, grief, and rage consumed Thyestes in an instant. His heart, which had felt triumph only moments before, shattered into 1,000 fragments. He realized, with unbearable clarity, that he had been deceived in the most personal and horrific way imaginable. He had eaten the flesh of his own son. Atreus remained composed, his calm face belying the storm of cruelty he had unleashed. This was not merely revenge, it was a lesson, a testament to the extremes of human rage, and a warning to all who might consider betrayal or hubris. The gods, it seemed, watched silently, allowing mortals to wrestle with consequences too terrible to imagine. The banquet, once a place of celebration and abundance, became a theater of despair. Thyestes, consumed by grief and horror, could do nothing but stare at the remnants of his child, his mind reeling with disbelief. The room, alive with light and laughter moments before, now felt suffocating, shadowed, and empty. In that moment, the curse of the house of Atreus revealed itself fully. Betrayal begetting revenge, revenge begetting horror, horror begetting tragedy. What had begun as envy and seduction had escalated into a nightmare that would echo through generations, shaping destinies and staining the bloodline with acts too cruel to ever forget. And so the infamous feast reached its dreadful climax, marking the beginning of a cycle of vengeance, grief, and unimaginable suffering that would haunt Thyestes, Atreus, and their descendants for generations to come. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The moment came, inevitable and terrifying. Thyestes, still sitting at the golden table, had eaten and laughed, unaware of the full horror surrounding him. But now Atreus leaned forward, his calm demeanor unshakable, and spoke the words that would shatter Thyestes' world forever. "Do you recognize him?" Atreus asked softly, gesturing toward the centerpiece of the feast. Thyestes' gaze followed the motion, confusion clouding his eyes, and then the truth struck him with the force of 1,000 storms. The realization was immediate, visceral, and unimaginable. The son he had loved more than life itself, the child he had held in his arms and dreamed of protecting, had been killed, and he had eaten him. Every bite, every morsel, every moment of enjoyment was now a mark of unspeakable horror. For a long moment, Thyestes could not speak. His mind reeled, trying to comprehend the impossible. How could a father, a man, a brother, endure such betrayal? How could he have been blind to the signs? Every sound in the hall, the clinking of silverware, the low murmur of the servants, the flicker of the torches, suddenly became unbearable. Atreus, meanwhile, maintained his icy composure. There was no gloating, no raised voice, only the cold precision of a man delivering the ultimate justice, or the ultimate vengeance, depending on one's perspective. In that moment, Atreus became both judge and executioner, his revenge perfected, his wrath complete. Thyestes rose from the table, trembling, staggering, barely able to stand. His mind was consumed by grief and rage, emotions so raw and intense that they threatened to tear him apart from the inside. He screamed, a sound of pure anguish that echoed through the golden halls and seemed to reverberate in the very stones of Mycenae. You monster!" Thyestes cried, his voice breaking. His hands shook as he pointed toward Atreus, accusing and desperate. Every word carried the weight of a father's love and a brother's betrayal, a combination so powerful that it seemed almost supernatural in its intensity. Atreus did not flinch. His eyes were steady, cold, unyielding. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was a calculated act of revenge, the culmination of years of rage and humiliation. Every step, every plan, every sleepless night had led to this single moment of horror, and it was now complete. Around them, the palace fell into an uneasy silence. Servants and courtiers, who had watched the events unfold with a mixture of fear and awe, dared not speak. The room, once filled with the warmth of light and laughter, had become a tomb of grief and despair. Every shadow seemed darker, every corner more sinister, as if the palace itself mourned the atrocity that had been committed within its walls. Thyestes, consumed by a rage that was now beyond comprehension, could do nothing but collapse to the floor, tears streaming down his face. His grief was absolute, uncontainable, a force of nature that could not be resisted. In his mind, he replayed the moments of the feast, the laughter, the enjoyment, every bite now transformed into unbearable guilt and sorrow. And yet, the horror did not end with Thyestes' grief. This act, so heinous and calculated, carried with it a curse that would follow the house of Atreus for generations. The gods, silent witnesses to the atrocity, allowed the cycle of vengeance to continue, ensuring that the sins of one generation would echo into the next. The revelation of the feast marked not only the destruction of a father's heart, but the deepening of a legacy of horror. Thyestes' mind, shattered by grief, could only imagine the suffering to come, the endless cycle of revenge, the retribution that would strike both him and his descendants, and the inescapable shadow of his brother's wrath. In that moment, the house of Atreus became more than a family. It became a symbol, a cautionary tale of what can happen when envy, betrayal, and vengeance intertwine. The horror of the feast was not merely in the act itself, but in the consequences that would ripple outward, touching the lives of all who belonged to that cursed lineage. Thyestes' scream faded into a long, hollow silence. He remained on the floor, trembling, a man broken by grief and terror. Atreus stood, a figure of relentless justice, his plan fulfilled, his wrath executed with precision. The banquet, once a symbol of opulence and family pride, had transformed into a monument of horror, a moment in history that would echo through mythology for centuries to come. The revelation was complete. The horror had reached its peak. And yet, in the aftermath, the story of Thyestes' feast was only beginning, a story of revenge, blood, and tragedy that would haunt generations, shaping destinies and leaving scars upon the house of Atreus that would never heal. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Horror. The horror of Thyestes' feast did not end with the banquet hall emptied or with the echoes of Thyestes' anguished cries fading into the walls of Mycenae. No, the consequences of Atreus' revenge extended far beyond that single, dreadful night. The house of Atreus was now irrevocably stained, its lineage marked by blood, betrayal, and the shadow of an unrelenting curse. Thyestes, broken and consumed by grief, fled the palace, leaving behind the golden halls that had once symbolized wealth and power. He wandered through the lands, a man haunted by what he had unknowingly consumed, the memory of his child burned into his mind like an unhealable wound. Every village, every river, every shadow seemed to remind him of the atrocity. And yet, the rage within him began to grow, not just against Atreus, but against the fate that had brought such suffering upon him. The gods themselves watched silently, neither intervening nor condemning. In Greek mythology, such silence was often more terrifying than direct action. It was a reminder that mortals must wrestle with the consequences of their choices, their passions, and their failings. The curse of the house of Atreus was no longer just a family feud. It had become a divine warning, a testament to the destructive power of vengeance unchecked. In the generations that followed, the shadows of the feast stretched far and wide. Atreus's descendants were not spared the burden of this horror. Agamemnon, the famed king who would lead Greek armies to Troy, and his sister Clytemnestra became actors in a tragic drama shaped by the sins of their ancestors. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon, would later face bloodshed and the cycle of revenge that began with the murder of Thyestes' child. The sins of one generation became the nightmares of the next, proving that vengeance, once enacted, is rarely confined to a single moment. Playwrights centuries later would recount the story in tragic form. Seneca, in his Roman adaptations, would immortalize Thyestes' feast as one of the darkest expressions of human cruelty. The tale was retold not merely for shock, but as a meditation on the extremes of ambition, envy, and the relentless desire for retribution. Cannibalism, in this story, became more than horror. It was a symbol of obsession, a mirror reflecting the ways in which humans consume one another with their passions and pride. The psychological toll of the banquet was immense. Thyestes' grief, Atreus' cold satisfaction, the gods' silent observation, these elements combined to create a narrative that explored the depths of the human psyche. The story forced listeners to confront uncomfortable questions. How far would one go to punish betrayal? When does justice cross into monstrosity? How can cycles of vengeance be broken once begun? The house of Atreus, forever cursed, serves as a reminder that some acts of vengeance are so extreme that they shape not only individuals, but entire lineages. Thyestes' son, innocent and unknowing, became the focal point of this tragedy, a reminder that the consequences of hatred often reach far beyond their intended targets. Every act of betrayal, every choice fueled by rage, had the potential to echo across generations. And so, the legend of Thyestes' feast endures. It is not just a story of horror, it is a reflection of the dangers inherent in human nature, the ways pride and envy can twist love into destruction, and the lengths to which vengeance can drive us. The feast itself, horrifying as it was, is eclipsed only by the ripple effects of its aftermath, a testament to the enduring power of myth to teach, to caution, and to haunt. Today, we look back on this tale not merely as an ancient story of cannibalism and revenge, but as a warning, a meditation on morality, and an exploration of the darkest aspects of human ambition. The house of Atreus, cursed by its own choices, reminds us that history is not just a series of events. It is a mirror reflecting the timeless struggles within every human heart. And so, the story closes, leaving us with the chilling truth. Revenge, once enacted, cannot be undone. The darkness of that fateful feast lingers, casting shadows not only over Mycenae, but over all who dare to tread the perilous path of pride, betrayal, and vengeance. The legacy of horror is eternal, a cautionary tale whispered through the ages, reminding us of the price paid when ambition and wrath go unchecked.